Hey guys, I'm back with another super in-depth video essay about an inanimate insanity couple that needs a lot more deep coverage than the fandom gives them. A lot of people won't believe me, but that's because you have to be a true inanimate insanity fan to understand the importance of this relationship. Goo and Lifering's relationship goes beyond the eyes of the game, and I'm here to explain it to you all. I'll start the same way I did in my last video essay by going over and analysing what we are given in the show, just so that we're all on the same page and maybe I can bring to light some points that go beyond the regular watcher's eye. In the show, Goo and Lifering don't talk as much as other relationships, but don't let this undermine your opinion of them. They're caught standing next to each other in quite a few frames, notably on Indefinite Island in episode 10, as we can guess that the two would have had a lot of time to bond on the island in the short time between Goo's arrival and the rejoin challenge. At the time of their eliminations, the only Indefinite Islanders are Goo, Lifering, TK, Cabby, and Blueberry, who is shown to not be very fond of the others nor even attempting to get along with them, per his flashbacks in episode 16. We can assume that much is true of Cabby as well, given she acts coldly towards the other Islanders come the rejoin challenge, putting herself first and refusing the idea of working together with Goo until she needs him. Lifering pairs with Tea Kettle in the rejoin challenge because naturally they are the most willing to work together given their experience on the same team back in the game. This would automatically give them an advantage towards being the strongest people in the challenge, which is likely why they stick together. That and the fact that TK chose to help him over herself. But we know Goo is a very friendly person who would have been happy to work alongside anyone. We know that from his time on the show, but notably in this episode when he stops to encourage Blueberry despite him showing no interest in the challenge at all. Noting here that the only other person who encouraged Blueberry was Lifering, showing that the two are extremely caring towards others. One thing though that doesn't get talked about is Goo's attempt to team up with Cabby, because the important thing about this is, who would he have had to be keeping a close eye on to get the idea from? That's right, Lifering. Alas, the winner of the rejoin challenge is Cabby and, excluding Blueberry as he would have wanted, the Indefinite Island crew is reduced to Lifering, TK and Goo. This means that the three would have bonded as friends as the game continued, giving Goo and Lifering a chance to get closer. Though this isn't seen to us, we can assume that this much happened on the island, given how friendly this group of characters are and how open to interaction they are. I can imagine them eating some nice hors d'oeuvres together. Poor TK though, she always gets stuck as the motherly third wheel. Soon though, Test Tube, who joins quickly after, Candle and Bot join them on the island, which leads us into Goo and Lifering's few other on-camera interactions in the span of season 3. In episode 15, the Indefinite Islanders are given a chance to rejoin the game, which means we begin the episode with those who are on the island. But here we get a special little moment of them making physical contact. When Blueberry exits the boat, he pushes Goo into Lifering, waking him up from his peaceful slumber. You can see that Lifering is a little caught off guard by the contact, but Goo finds himself quite comfortable and doesn't even try moving off of him until Lifering physically pulls him off, which I think sets up their dynamic pretty well. This is also the thumbnail for the trailer, by the way. An honourable mention to the sneaky little glance Lifering gives Goo's direction when he's sleeping though. Lifering is the only one fully awake at this point, and Goo is the only person fully asleep. The rest are exhausted given it's 3 AM, but it's like Lifering, who is used to the work, sits himself by the most defenseless person to make sure that they're kept safe whilst they're asleep. Cut to further into the episode after Lifering and Cabby are paired up and come up with their theory. It's Goo that Lifering targets. We know that it's because Cabby happened to find the Goo that was placed on the ground by Blueberry, but we also know Blueberry is a mastermind. How much of this was calculated? Is Blueberry actually as good of a matchmaker as Flory is? Lifering targets him and pressures him, taking the charge over Cabby. Why? Is it just because of his loud and confident personality? Or does he know that his accusations will get to Goo the most? Regardless, they pressure him, trying to get him to crack and admit that he was the murderer, and it makes him very nervous as he attempts to defend himself. But Lifering thinks he can see right through Goo's nervous act, which he can't because Goo wasn't actually the murderer, and keeps accusing him. Lifering also is known for giving a lot of people nicknames, and here is where we see him do that to Goo for the first time. Twice. But we can assume that if they talk to or about each other on Indefinite Island, that these nicknames, at least Gooey, since it's more endearing and friendly than Goo Goo Gaga, were pre-existing, as Lifering more often than not is seen calling his friends by their nicknames rather than their actual names. Examples of this are him calling TK TK, but this is commonly done by the others as well. Bluebear and Bluester instead of Blueberry, and Cab's Cabinet for Cabby, but that was only for one episode. Still, Lifering likes to speak in endearing nicknames for a lot of the characters that he's well acquainted with, which means we can assume that much is true for off-camera as well. And as someone who also has a unique way of expressing himself through silly analogies, can you start to see the similarities between Goo and Lifering? how they both creatively express themselves and their appreciation for the people around them. Ultimately though, Lifering was wrong, as was everyone else in the challenge, and all of that pressuring Goo was for nothing. The eliminated contestants then go back and wait for their chance to become part of the jury to decide the winner out of the final 3, which means we don't hear from them for a little while. But here's to hoping that Lifering did eventually apologise for practically combusting Goo and accusing him of murder. Let's skip forward to when they make their reappearance as members of the final jury. They enter the scene in order of their elimination, and lucky for us, this sits them right next to each other, with Goo on the step below Lifering. They don't really have much to do in the jury though, unfortunately, which is why I'm grasping at straws here. They ask a few questions to keep the scenes moving along, but aside from that, their arcs were very much stand alone to themselves and didn't really have anything to do with the final 3 at all. I mean, Lifering didn't have much of a chance to even have his own arc at all in the game. He just sort of exists to push the others along. T-Kirtle's realization of her own selflessness in the first rejoin challenge. Cabby's struggle with knowing when and how to use her files, and also dealing with how other people react to her choice to not using them at all in the second rejoin. And that's really it. Which I guess makes sense given Lifering seems confident and sure of himself in all of the content he appears in. His entire backing for a lot of his character is how much he cares about other people and wants them to be safe and happy. So him existing to help the others along does work, but who knows what we could have had if he had stayed a little longer. Goo did have a longer stay in the game, so naturally he was led into an arc of his own, which was his appreciation for Bot and how he communicates that appreciation. His arc played an important part in showcasing Bot's change to the audience and how people experiencing similar changes in their life might feel about the attention. It was a great arc with a need to be in the story, and a good showcase of Goo's character and how his heart is always in the right place, even if his words and analogies make things a little more complicated. It's safe to say that Lifering and Goo, had they both had the same amount of time in the game, would have experienced similar arcs relating to their care of others. Lifering cares for others in the sense that he wants to keep them safe and aware naturally, since his job as a lifesaver basically requires him to need to do this. In this way, he is hyper aware of everything. I mean, we see it in episode 3. He notices the second that Nickel disappears with his safety kit. He is very aware of everything around him. Lifering thinks very awarely, and as a result, most of his care is shown very literally. This much is obvious when he's telling TK to care more about herself in the rejoin challenge. He puts a strong emphasis on complimenting the way she plays the game, strongly and smartly, rather than her personal attributes like her selflessness. He also puts a stronger emphasis on not letting her waste her time on him, which proves to me that Lifering is mostly aware of what's happening around him rather than himself, and is okay with that if it means helping the others. When TK tries to tell him that she would feel guilty, he is quickly able to shut her down and tell her there's no time for feelings. Compared to Goo, Lifering is very tone deaf as well, example being when he couldn't pick up on Nickel's sarcasm in episode 2, further proving how literal he is and thinks. On the alternative though, Goo speaks primarily with his heart. I mean, I don't really need to further explain this one. The reason he got eliminated was because he spoke too much with his heart about Bot, making an entire film about how wonderful he thought they were. Goo's entire gimmick from the beginning has been that he speaks with his heart, even when it doesn't amount to anything and ends up resulting in an analogy that no one except for him can really understand. Goo cares for people with his words and with his heart, whereas Lifering cares for others with his actions and with his head. My proof of this is how they encourage Blueberry and TK respectively in episode 10's rejoin challenge. They both begin the challenge wanting to get back in, of course, but both of them, at some point in the challenge, sacrifice their time to help someone else. When Lifering realizes TK is being too self-sacrificial towards him, he stands up to her and tells her she would have the best shot at winning if she rejoined. He tells her to stop focusing on him, to focus less on feelings and to win. But Goo, when realizing that Blueberry is putting too little effort into the challenge, stops to tell him to keep going and to try. Not to win, to at least try. But the way he does it foils with how Lifering does to TK. He puts a focus on himself, he tells Blueberry that he's had experience with legs before and they're not that hard, and that it's okay if you fall and squish because he does it all of the time. He stays and he talks to Blueberry, whereas Lifering tells TK that there's no time and they have to work. In this way, I think the two could benefit a lot from each other. Obviously, nobody is perfect, especially not when giving reassurance to people. You know, everyone needs something different. But had they both had the time, I think they would have had arcs that could have leaned into each other. Goo's singular arc throughout season 3 before he gets eliminated is that he speaks too many words with his heart. He needs to learn what other people need as well, what's around him. He needs to get out of his head or his heart and pay attention. Goo has always been well-intentioned from the start. He needs no real character changes, he just needs to learn how to be more aware of the people he cares about. Whereas Lifering, His entire job, what he devotes himself to, is being aware of other people. What he needs to learn is that caring about other people doesn't have to be self-sacrificial, and he could learn to be a little more in tune with emotions too. Of course though, this is what could have been, or what could be in the future. The last shot all the cast together during the party for Cabby had Goo, Clover and Lifering in the same conversation, as well as OJ, who cannot contribute much at this point. Though this is likely because they were the ones who just didn't really fit into the other groups, TK still chooses to sit with Nick Loon and Lifering chooses Goo and Clover. Hooray for new friendships! So that's basically everything from season 3, but I have to give a special mention to quite possibly the best bit of Gooring media we have from Animation Epic. Goo's exit interview. If you haven't watched his exit interview, you should right now because Goo is such a joy to listen to. But I'm bringing it up for one scene in particular, and if you have seen it, you know exactly what I'm going to talk about. The interview starts off pretty smoothly until Goo anticipates that he's about to be interrupted. But by who, you might ask? Well, the sponsor, of course. The sponsor delivered by none other than Lifering himself. And what's even better than that? The sponsor is Bee and Puppycat, an adorably styled Netflix show. Goo goes along with the sponsor and encourages Lifering, becoming part of the sponsor segment himself. Lifering excitedly explains the plot to Bee and Puppycat to, well, the audience, but also to Goo, who asks questions along the way. And they seem like genuine interest as well past the very first introduction where he's very clearly just encouraging Lifering's segue into the sponsor. Goo even fills in the story on the parts that he remembers, finishing Lifering's sentences. And of course finishing those sentences with long-winded analogies that make little to no sense. But Lifering does the same and, albeit awkwardly, encourages Goo as well. Then Lifering suggests to people who can't wait for season 2 of Bee and Puppycat that they should rewatch season 1. Important to note here that he says people who can't wait like me, insinuating that he will be one of the people rewatching season 1. Then, as the sponsor comes to a close, Goo says that he will definitely be catching up on that right after the interview. Is it just me, or do we smell an opportunity for the two to indulge in some movie nights together when they watch season 1? And then again, when they eventually get hooked onto the show and anticipate season 2's release. This ad is my favourite example of how well the two bounce off of each other, how quickly Goo is to jump to encouraging Lifering into the ad, and how genuinely invested he becomes just by listening to him. How he gets so interested that he ends up rambling, and Lifering, although he doesn't quite get it, because let's be real, whoever gets Goo's metaphors, encourages him anyway. It's honestly an extremely precious watch and is one of the things that makes me so pained to realise how much of a fun pair they missed out on in canon. So that's it really. Aside from everything I mentioned and being in a few thumbnails together, we don't really get much of Gooring at all. The wiki, which is fan managed I believe, lists them as rivals, which is wild to me. At what point in the show were they rivals? Everything I went over in this video is everything they ever say to each other, excluding the one time they talk right after each other in episode 3 when Goo and Bot stumble upon the raft with the sinkers in it. They were put directly against each other for a single challenge, and even then it was just Lifering lightheartedly against Goo, and Goo was just nervously defending himself. And it wasn't even a personal attack for no reason, it was pretty justified. Everyone had fallen into Blueberry's numerous traps at that point and all had someone else in mind. This isn't important to the video, I just had to mention it because it makes me so mad. If anyone comes across the wiki pages for either of them and hasn't seen the episodes, do not be deceived, that doesn't mean a thing, they are not rivals. I firmly believe there is something between these two that hasn't been explored yet that should be. Ever since I came across, this probably isn't the right wording for it, more like made, I've searched and I don't see a single person mentioning them together. This pairing, it's baffled me every time I remember that they canonically hardly interact. They're a perfect duo in so many ways. They're so similar in their hearts and their care for others, but they both have so much to learn in the way they communicate that care and how they relate it to themselves. Their lessons in awareness of both people around them and themselves could be so valuable for each other to learn. And I mean really, if we're calling them a rare pair, put their personalities together and that alone is already a fun and interesting dynamic. Seriously, put a logical, literal and confident worker with a daydreaming, creative and anxious mind. Enough said really, but I could say more. And I will. This is the indoctrination stage of the video. If you haven't been convinced already, I will convince you now. I'm starting a Gooring army and I will be your commander. So listen up, soldier. Goo's anxious and loving personality clashes so well with Lifering's confident and tone-deaf one. Lifering is the type of guy to have no clue that Goo would have a crush on him. I mean, come on, the guy couldn't pick up on Nickel's sarcasm, when sarcasm is literally Nickel's whole thing. Goo could be openly and nervously trying to flirt with him and he would have no clue unless it was directly said to him. And on that, imagine the flirting. We've heard Goo's mess of analogies. The only thing smooth about Goo is his body. He would fumble all over his words and come up with the most confusing line you have ever heard. And Lifering, who already can't tell that he's flirting, So confused. But maybe he'd laugh a bit and Goo would walk away thinking he absolutely scored him. Think about how Goo was so quick to encourage Lifering's ad in the exit interview, and how much he would encourage him in general. Goo is the type of person to drown on purpose just so that Lifering has a chance to feel needed and show off his impeccable life-saving, or his knowledge of CPR. Imagine Goo physically melting over Lifering. We know that if Goo's a gay, he's a gay panic type of gay, but he's also so loving and affectionate. I like to base this entirely around the scene in episode 15 where Blueberry did squeeze them together, but I think Goo would lose his mind at any physical contact. He's a squishy guy too, so how could you resist picking him up or giving him a squeeze? He would melt in Lifering's hand. And after all of this, Lifering finally realizes. He gets over his literal sense of thinking and disregarding himself in situations, and suddenly Goo's feelings become clear to him. And he has no choice but to consider himself in the equation now. And then he realizes all of Goo's actions and his words were for him, to get his attention and to make him feel loved. If we're talking love languages, Goo's is easily words of affirmation and Lifering's has to be acts of service. Plus look at them, their designs clash so nicely. I could go on and on and on about my thoughts about this pairing. I know I probably sound crazy or straight up delusional thinking that there is more here than we're let in on, but just think about it. There is so much potential here for such a fun dynamic, and I think the two of them deserve to be in a relationship where they feel loved and heard, especially as some of the few characters left out of the significant groups in II3. They have a lot to learn about how they care for others, and they have a lot they could learn from each other about it too. Happy April Fools! This ship isn't a joke, but I thought releasing a fully fledged essay on a rare pair with little to no canon content would be pretty funny. It ended up being longer than I thought, which is a little embarrassing. What's even more embarrassing is admitting that this ship is my second favourite in IA. I genuinely have to stop and remind myself that they aren't canon, not even close friends all of the time. Because to me they just work so well. I've never seen a pair of characters with so much potential that never get explored in their canon material in my life, and I'm so confident about that. Both Goo and Lifering are quite underrated characters as well, and I mean fair enough, they don't do a lot compared to characters like Bot or Paintbrush. But ever since I explored what their relationship could have been, they have both consumed my mind like pests and jumped my favourites list by miles. And this has been from my own imagination and analysis alone. Imagine what we could have had if we had more scenes like the Bee and Puppy Cat sponsorship. Goo's stupid little rambles and Lifering having no clue what he's talking about but encouraging him anyway. I just think they're so precious and more people need to consider what we could have had or what we can have past season 3 now, assuming that the contestants stay together for a little while longer. Anyway, I post about the ship regularly on my socials and have no plans to stop anytime soon, so if you are interested, definitely follow me through the links in the description. I make fan art and playlists based on them, and I will always talk about my thoughts about them to anyone who asks. Now that you made it to the end though, welcome to the Gooring army, soldier. I hope you'll enjoy your time serving here. If anyone, and I mean anyone, posts about or draws these two, please tag me, Tweakum Army, on everything, so that I can share the hell out of it and type paragraphs about how much I love it. I've done so much work on them in my head that they kind of feel like OCs at this point. So I've grown such a personal connection to them and would be ecstatic to see any content of them at any quality whatsoever. So please, think of me when you think of Gooring. And I hope this video has instilled a virus in your brain that makes you do think about them. Thank you for watching through another one of my video essays. This one is nowhere near as serious as the others because I didn't have much to go off of, but I enjoy making these videos more than anything, so I'll be sure to do more in the future. My next one will most likely be related to Flory, who became one of my favourites after being my most hated character ever, so look out for that. But if you have ideas for things you think I should explore, comment or DM me. I'll take any excuse to rewatch Inanimate Insanity for the 16th time. That's all from me. Happy Easter and April to everyone, and stay tuned to more from me. And a special goodbye and salute to the new Gooring soldiers. I'll enjoy seeing you on the field.